My name is Dean Walker. The knock on my front door came just as I finished unpacking the last moving box. I glanced at the clock. 6:14 p.m. Perfect timing. Whoever it was had managed to interrupt the only moment I'd had to sit down all day. I opened the door expecting a delivery driver. Instead, a woman about my age stood on my porch holding a white ceramic plate covered with a checkered kitchen towel. She smiled politely. "Hi." I smiled back. "Hi. I'm Rebecca." She lifted the plate slightly. "I live next door." I nodded toward the house beside mine. "The blue one?" "That's right." She laughed softly. I figured I'd welcome the new neighbor before someone else beat me to it. I couldn't help smiling. "That's very thoughtful. My grandmother would have been disappointed if I showed up empty-handed." She pulled back the towel. "A dozen homemade chocolate chip cookies. They looked far better than anything sold in a bakery." "I baked too many." She shrugged. "At least that's the excuse I'm using." I laughed. "I'll pretend to believe you." "Good." She handed me the plate. Our fingers brushed for barely a second. It shouldn't have meant anything. Didn't. Not yet. "Thank you." "You're welcome." For a moment we simply stood there. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to end the conversation. "You moved here alone?" she asked. "I did." "What about your family?" "No wife. No kids." She nodded slowly. "I understand." Something about the way she said it made me think she wasn't just making conversation. I almost asked what she meant. Instead, I pointed toward the moving boxes stacked behind me. "I've still got half the house to unpack." "I remember." She smiled. "I hated moving." "You've done it a lot?" "More than I wanted." There was something in her voice. A quiet sadness. Gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Before I could ask about it, she looked at me for a long second. Really looked at me. Almost as if she were trying to recognize someone. I smiled politely. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, the corners of her mouth lifted into the smallest smile. Then she quietly said, "Don't ever forget to smile." The plate almost slipped from my hands. Every sound around me disappeared. The birds, the passing cars, the wind moving through the trees. Nothing existed anymore except those 5 words. My heart started pounding so hard I could actually hear it. I stared at her. She stared back, waiting, as if she already knew what was happening inside my head. Because nobody, not one single person, had said those words to me in 15 years. And the only woman who ever had disappeared from my life without a goodbye. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Rebecca didn't look surprised by my reaction. If anything, she looked relieved, as though she'd just confirmed something she'd been wondering for a very long time. I finally found my voice. "How?" came out barely above a whisper. "Do you know those words?" She studied my face. "I wasn't sure you'd remember." "Remember?" I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. "Rebecca," I swallowed. "Only one person has ever said that to me." She nodded. "I know." My heart pounded even harder. "You know?" She glanced toward the house next door before looking back at me. "May I come in for a minute?" Normally, I would have invited any new neighbor inside without thinking. This time, I simply stepped aside. She walked into the living room, still holding herself with the quiet confidence of someone who wasn't afraid of awkward silence. I closed the door behind us. Moving boxes were everywhere. She smiled. "You really did just move in?" "Yesterday." "I thought so." I placed the cookies on the kitchen counter, then turned toward her. "I think you owe me an explanation." She nodded. "I do." For a few seconds, she looked around the room. Family photos hadn't been unpacked yet. The walls were empty. The house didn't feel like home. Not yet. Finally, she looked back at me. "Do you remember a small coffee shop called Maggie's?" My eyebrows lifted. "On Cedar Street?" She smiled. "You do remember. I spent half of college there." "So did I." I frowned. "I would have remembered you." "I know." She took a slow breath. "You weren't looking at me." That answer confused me even more. "What does that mean?" "It means..." She hesitated. "You were always looking at someone else." I stared at her, trying to understand. Then suddenly, a memory surfaced. A corner table. Every Thursday afternoon, The same girl sitting across from me. Brown hair. A green sweater she wore far too often. Always laughing. Rebecca watched my expression carefully. I can see it. What? You're starting to remember. I remember the coffee shop. She nodded. But not me. I hated admitting it. No. She smiled. Not offended. Almost amused. I didn't think you would. Have we met before? Oh, many times. That answer only made me more confused. I don't understand. She walked toward one of the unopened boxes. Sitting on top was an old framed photograph I'd forgotten to wrap. She picked it up, looked at it, then quietly laughed. You still keep it. I looked at the frame. It was an old picture of my college friends. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed where her finger rested. The coffee shop in the background. A blurred figure carrying a tray. I stepped closer, took the frame from her. My heart skipped. The waitress. She was barely visible, out of focus, but she was there. Rebecca smiled softly. I worked there for almost 3 years. I looked back at her. No. She nodded. I served you coffee every Thursday. I searched her face again, this time more carefully. The smile, the eyes, the way she tilted her head while waiting for an answer. Suddenly, I saw her. I do. For a few seconds, she looked around the room. Family photos hadn't been unpacked yet. The walls were empty. The house didn't feel like home. Not yet. Finally, she looked back at me. Do you remember a small coffee shop called Maggie's? My eyebrows lifted. On Cedar Street? She smiled. You do remember. I spent half of college there. So did I. I frowned. I would have remembered you. I know. She took a slow breath. You weren't looking at me. That answer confused me even more. What does that mean? It means. She hesitated. You were always looking at someone else. I stared at her, trying to understand. Then suddenly, a memory surfaced. A corner table. Every Thursday afternoon. The same girl sitting across from me. Brown hair. A green sweater she wore far too often. Always laughing. Rebecca watched my expression carefully. I can see it. What? You're starting to remember. I remember the coffee shop. She nodded. But not me. I hated admitting it. No. She smiled. Not offended. Almost amused. I didn't think you would. Have we met before? Oh, many times. That answer only made me more confused. I don't understand. She walked toward one of the unopened boxes. Sitting on top was an old framed photograph I'd forgotten to wrap. She picked it up, looked at it, then quietly laughed. You still keep it. I looked at the frame. It was an old picture of my college friends. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed where her finger rested. The coffee shop in the background. A blurred figure carrying a tray. I stepped closer, took the frame from her. My heart skipped. The waitress. She was barely visible, out of focus, but she was there. Rebecca smiled softly. I worked there for almost 3 years. I looked back at her. No. She nodded. I served you coffee every Thursday. I searched her face again, this time more carefully. The smile, the eyes, the way she tilted her head while waiting for an answer. Suddenly, I saw her. Not the woman standing in my living room. The young waitress, 15 years younger, hair tied back, apron covered in coffee stains, always carrying 2 mugs to my table. I couldn't believe I'd never recognized her. You? I shook my head. You were the waitress. I was. But. I laughed in disbelief. We barely spoke. Rebecca looked down. You barely spoke to me. There was a difference. A big one. I always knew your name. She smiled sadly. You never learned mine. The words hit harder than they should have. Because she was right. I remembered her face now. I remembered her smile. I remembered seeing her every week. But I had never asked her name. Not once. Then another memory returned. Every Thursday, when I paid my bill, she always smiled and quietly said the exact same words. Don't ever forget to smile. I looked up at her, completely stunned. It was you. She nodded. It was always me. I slowly sat down. I don't understand. Rebecca smiled gently. I know. She took the chair across from me. For 15 years, I kept wondering if you'd ever remember. I should have. You had no reason to. I saw hundreds of customers every week. You only saw one girl. The room fell silent. She wasn't accusing me. She was simply telling the truth. You were always with her. I knew exactly who she meant. Emily, my girlfriend back then. The woman I thought I'd marry. Rebecca looked down at her hands. You looked happy. I was. She nodded. I know. I leaned forward. But that still doesn't explain why you remembered me. A small smile crossed her face. You were different. How? You noticed people. I frowned. I obviously didn't notice you. She laughed quietly. You noticed everyone else. I looked confused. She continued. When the elderly man couldn't afford breakfast. You paid without telling him. I blinked. I barely remember that. I do. When one of our waitresses dropped an entire tray, everyone complained. You helped her clean it up. I smiled faintly. I remember that. You left huge tips when you barely had enough money yourself. I was working 2 jobs. I know. You knew. Rebecca nodded. You used to study at the corner table until closing. I heard enough conversations. I laughed. So you were spying on me. I was serving coffee. Convenient excuse. She smiled. It is. For the first time since she'd arrived, everything felt natural, almost easy. Then she became serious again. There was one Thursday. She paused. The last Thursday. Immediately I remembered. Emily had broken up with me the night before. I'd barely slept. I'd shown up at Maggie's looking like I hadn't seen daylight in weeks. Rebecca looked at me carefully. You never smiled that day. I looked away. No. You paid for your coffee. You stood up. And before you reached the door, she smiled softly. I said something. I finished the sentence for her. Don't ever forget to smile. She nodded. You stopped walking. I remember. You turned around. For the first time. You actually looked at me. The memory came rushing back. I had smiled. Just a little. Then I'd thanked the waitress. Not because of the coffee. Because of those words. What happened after that? Rebecca took a deep breath. I was going to tell you my name. I looked at her. But my manager called me into the kitchen. When I came back, you were gone. Neither of us spoke. Finally I asked, so why didn't you tell me 15 years ago? She smiled sadly. Because a week later, you stopped coming. I thought about it. She was right. Emily and I had broken up. College ended. I got a job in another city. Life moved on faster than I'd expected. I never went back. No. Rebecca looked toward the window. I waited every Thursday for almost 2 months. My chest tightened. I thought maybe you were sick. Then I thought you'd transferred. Eventually, she laughed softly. I realized you were just gone. I didn't know what to say, because there wasn't anything to say. Sometimes people disappear from each other's lives. Not because they choose to, but because life quietly pulls them in different directions. Rebecca looked back at me. I never expected to see you again. Then why are you here? She smiled. I bought the house next door 3 weeks ago. You already lived here? I did. I frowned. Then how did you know I was moving in? She laughed. I didn't. I walked outside yesterday morning. I saw the moving truck. I saw you climb out. She paused. I recognized you immediately, and I just stood there. For almost 5 minutes. You didn't come over. I wasn't sure. About what? She looked directly into my eyes. Whether you'd remember my face, or whether I'd only ever be the girl who served you coffee. I looked out the living room window. The house next door suddenly didn't feel like just another house. For 15 years, the woman who had quietly become part of one chapter of my life had somehow ended up living 30 feet away. Life had a strange sense of humor. Rebecca stood beside me. I almost knocked yesterday. What stopped you? She smiled. You looked exhausted. I was. You were carrying boxes by yourself. I was too stubborn to hire movers. I noticed. You watched me? She laughed. More than I should have. I couldn't help smiling. I guess we're both guilty of that. She glanced toward the plate of cookies. You haven't tried one. I've been a little distracted. Fair point. I picked one up. Still warm. One bite was enough. They're incredible. My grandmother's recipe. I hope she knows what she's doing. Rebecca smiled proudly. She won the county baking competition 4 years in a row. I suddenly feel very unqualified to judge. You should. We both laughed. It felt surprisingly comfortable. Like talking to someone I'd known much longer than I actually had. Or maybe someone who had quietly been part of my life without me realizing it. So, Rebecca folded her hands around her coffee mug. What happened after college? I leaned back. Nothing very exciting. I became an architect. Worked too much. Moved 3 times. Took care of my dad while he was sick. She listened without interrupting. He passed away 6 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you. What about you? She looked down into her coffee. I became a teacher. 3rd grade. I smiled. I can see that. You can. You're patient. She laughed. My students would disagree. Do you like it? I love it. The pay. She made a face. We don't talk about the pay. I laughed. Fair enough. There was a short silence. Not awkward. Just thoughtful. Then Rebecca asked the question I wasn't expecting. Did you ever get married? I shook my head. No. You? She shook her head too. No. Neither of us explained. Neither of us had to. A loud crash came from outside. Both of us looked toward the window. One of my moving boxes had fallen off the porch after a gust of wind. Rebecca laughed. I think your house is trying to unpack itself. I walked outside. She followed. Books were scattered across the walkway. We both knelt to pick them up. Rebecca suddenly stopped. She was holding a worn paperback. The Count of Monte Cristo. I smiled. My favorite. It used to be mine too. You've read it. 3 times. I looked at her. Seriously. She nodded. My dad gave me that book when I was 16. I laughed. My grandfather gave me this exact copy. Rebecca turned the book over. There was faded handwriting inside the cover. She read it aloud. To Dean. Never stop believing that patience changes everything. She looked at me. That's beautiful. It took me years to understand it. She gently handed the book back. Maybe we're both finally old enough to understand the books we loved when we were young. I smiled. That might be the smartest thing anyone has said to me all week. She laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. As we carried the last box inside together, I realized something. Rebecca hadn't walked into my life like a stranger. She had walked back into it. The difference was, this time I actually knew her name. Over the next few days, seeing Rebecca became part of my routine. It wasn't planned. It just happened. On Monday morning, she waved as I backed out of my driveway. Tuesday evening, she returned a package that had been delivered to her porch by mistake. Wednesday, I found myself helping her carry bags of mulch into her backyard. You know, she said, brushing dirt from her hands, you've been here less than a week, and you've already done more yard work than I have all month. I have a weakness. For landscaping? For saying yes. She laughed. I noticed. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather. As I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, I saw Rebecca kneeling beside a flower bed. She looked up. Good morning. Morning. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. I have a favor to ask. I'm almost afraid. She smiled. It's nothing terrible. We'll see. She pointed toward the garage. I bought a bookshelf. I looked at the unopened box. It says, assembly required. It also says 2 people. I sighed dramatically. I knew there was a catch. She laughed. I'll make lunch. Deal. 2 hours later, the bookshelf was finally standing, mostly straight. Rebecca stepped back and tilted her head. I think it's leaning. It's called character. She folded her arms. I think it's called backwards. I stared at the instructions, then at the shelf, then back at the instructions. You might be right. She burst into laughter. I've waited 15 years to see you lose an argument. I wasn't aware we were keeping score. Oh, we absolutely are. What is it now? She smiled proudly. 1-0. Lunch turned into coffee. Coffee turned into another conversation. The more we talked, the more it felt impossible that we'd once been strangers. or at least strangers to each other. Rebecca knew things about me that surprised me. You still tap your fingers when you're thinking. I do. All the time. I looked down. Without realizing it, my fingers were drumming lightly against the coffee mug. She smiled. You did that at Maggie's too. I laughed. So you've been studying me for 15 years. I've had a lot of practice. Later that afternoon, we took a walk through the neighborhood. There was a small community park only a few blocks away. Families were grilling. Kids were playing basketball. An older couple sat on a bench sharing an ice cream. Rebecca watched them for a moment. I always liked this park. I can see why. It's peaceful. She nodded. Then quietly added, I used to imagine bringing someone here. I looked at her. Did you? She smiled without looking at me. More times than I'd admit. Something about the way she said it made me wonder, was she talking about someone in general? Or someone specific? Before I could ask, a golden retriever came running toward us. The dog stopped directly in front of me, tail wagging furiously. Rebecca laughed. Looks like you've made a friend. A man hurried over, slightly out of breath. I'm so sorry. No problem. He clipped the leash back on. The dog refused to move. Instead, he sat beside me. The man laughed. Well, that's embarrassing. Rebecca smiled. I think he likes Dean. The man looked at us. You two make a nice couple. Neither of us answered. He apologized again and continued walking. Rebecca looked down at the sidewalk. I rubbed the back of my neck. People make assumptions. They do. Neither of us laughed this time. Because somewhere deep inside, neither of us completely hated the assumption. By the time we walked back to our street, the sun had started to set. The neighborhood looked different in the evening. Porch lights flickered on one by one. Someone nearby was grilling dinner. Children were riding their bikes before their parents called them inside. Rebecca slowed her pace. I've always liked this time of day. Why? She smiled. It feels like everyone finally exhales. I thought about it for a second. That's actually true. She looked at me. You've always rushed through life. You remember that too? I remember almost everything. As we reached our driveways, Rebecca stopped. I almost forgot. She disappeared into her house for a moment. When she came back, she was holding a small cardboard box. What's this? My grandmother made too much peach pie. You keep baking suspiciously large amounts of food. She laughed. I told you. It's how I make friends. I thought the cookies already made us friends. They helped. She handed me the box. Then, almost absent-mindedly, brushed a little flour from my sleeve. The gesture lasted less than a second, but somehow felt strangely familiar, comfortable, like something she'd done 100 times before. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of Rebecca, because of memories. I kept thinking about Maggie's coffee house, about the girl behind the counter. How many times had she smiled at me? How many opportunities had I missed simply because I never looked closely enough? I got out of bed, opened my laptop, typed one sentence into the search bar. Maggie's Coffee House, Cedar Street. The cafe had closed nearly 12 years ago. There were only a handful of old photographs online. I clicked through them one by one. Then I stopped. There she was, standing behind the espresso machine, hair tied back, wearing the same apron, smiling at a customer just outside the frame. I zoomed in. Even with the blurry image, it was unmistakably Rebecca. I leaned back in my chair. She hadn't imagined any of it. She really had been there every Thursday, watching a small part of my life unfold from the other side of the counter. And I'd never even learned her name. The next evening, someone knocked on my door again. When I opened it, Rebecca was standing there. But this time, there was no plate of cookies, no pie. She looked nervous, more nervous than I'd seen her before. Everything okay? She nodded. I hope so. She held up 2 tickets. I bought these months ago. I looked closer. An outdoor concert. Classic songs from the 70s and 80s. The kind of music almost everyone in the neighborhood grew up with. My friend was supposed to come. She smiled awkwardly. But she called this afternoon. Family emergency. So, she took a slow breath. I was wondering, would you like to go with me? For a second, I simply looked at the tickets. 15 years ago, I would have never imagined the quiet waitress from Maggie's would one day be standing on my porch asking me to spend an evening with her. I smiled. I'd love to. The relief on her face was impossible to miss. Really? Really? She laughed. I spent the last hour convincing myself you were going to say no. I almost did. Her smile disappeared. Because I wanted to say yes before you even finished asking. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled in exactly the same way she must have smiled behind that coffee shop counter all those years ago. And for the first time, felt less like two neighbors getting to know each other, and more like two people finally getting the chance they should have had 15 years earlier. Friday evening arrived faster than I expected. I hadn't been to an outdoor concert in years. By the time I parked near the town square, Rebecca was already waiting by the entrance. She was wearing dark jeans, a light blue sweater, and a denim jacket. Simple, comfortable, beautiful. She smiled the moment she saw me. I was starting to think you changed your mind. I was 5 minutes early. You were 3 minutes late. I looked at my watch. I don't think that's possible. It is if you've been waiting. I laughed. I forgot how competitive you are. You never knew. Fair point. The park was already crowded. Food trucks lined the walkway. Children chased bubbles across the grass. Couples unfolded lawn chairs. An older band was warming up on stage. Rebecca looked around with a smile. I used to come here with my grandparents. I've never been. Seriously. I was always working. She shook her head. That's sad. I thought it was responsible. Those aren't always the same thing. I smiled. You sound like my mother. I'll take that as a compliment. We bought lemonade and found a place on the grass. The music started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was the kind of music that made people sing along without realizing they knew every word. Rebecca quietly tapped her fingers against the cup. I noticed. What? She smiled. Nothing. You smiled. I did. That usually means you're about to tease me. She laughed. You finally pay attention. I've been trying. She looked at me for a second longer than usual. I know. Halfway through the concert, one of the singers invited couples to dance near the stage. Rebecca immediately looked away. I'm definitely not doing that. Why not? I haven't danced in years. I've never been good. She raised an eyebrow. So you're admitting defeat before we even start? I prefer to call it realistic. She laughed. I remember someone who said confidence was more important than talent. I stared at her. How do you know that? She smiled. You said it. When? One Thursday afternoon. She looked toward the stage. You were trying to convince your girlfriend that you could win a karaoke contest. I couldn't believe she remembered. I actually said that? Word for word. Covered my face. That's embarrassing. I thought it was adorable. Before I could answer, she stood up. Come on. What? We're dancing. I thought you said no. I changed my mind. She held out her hand. For a second, I hesitated. Then I took it. Neither of us was a good dancer. We laughed more than we danced. Stepped on each other's feet more than once. Apologized constantly. The song ended. Then another began. Neither of us noticed. Because somewhere between the music, the laughter, and the warm summer evening, the awkwardness we'd carried since seeing each other again had quietly disappeared. When the final song ended, we slowly walked back toward the parking lot. Rebecca looked happier than I'd ever seen her. So, what? You smiled all evening. I laughed. I guess I did. She looked up at me. Good. Why? Because 15 years ago. She paused. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you smile again. Those words stayed with me the entire drive home. Not because they were dramatic, because they were honest. And somehow, honesty was beginning to feel far more powerful than nostalgia. The next morning, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I was looking forward to seeing someone, not because we had plans, because I genuinely wanted to know how her day was going. As if on cue, there was a knock at my door. I opened it with a smile. Rebecca laughed immediately. What? You smiled before opening the door. I guess I did. I told you. You did. She held up 2 travel mugs. I made coffee. I looked inside. Please tell me this isn't instant. She placed a hand over her heart. I'm offended. Good. You should be. I took one of the mugs. She pointed toward my porch. Mind if I sit? Only if you promise not to judge the unpacked boxes. No promises. We sat in silence for a minute. Not because we had nothing to say, because neither of us felt the need to fill every quiet moment. Finally, Rebecca spoke. I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous. She smiled. It usually is. What about yesterday? The concert? She nodded. It reminded me of something. What? The first time I almost talked to you. I looked at her. You almost talked to me? 3 different times. I laughed. Seriously. The first was at Maggie's. You were reading a book. I walked all the way to your table. What happened? You looked up. I panicked. And I pretended to wipe the table next to you. I couldn't stop laughing. You did not. I absolutely did. That's unbelievable. It gets worse. There are more. Oh yes. The second time. You dropped your pen. I picked it up. I was about to hand it back. You thanked another customer because you thought it was him. I buried my face in my hands. Please tell me that's the end. It isn't. She was laughing so hard she could barely continue. The third time. You finally smiled at me. I remembered. The day you told me not to forget to smile. She nodded. I was going to tell you my name. What stopped you? She looked at me with a grin. You sneezed. I what? You sneezed. Then your phone rang. You answered it. And you walked out. I stared at her for 2 full seconds, then burst into laughter. So our entire story was ruined by a sneeze and a phone call. She nodded. Life has a strange sense of humor. Later that afternoon, I was trimming the hedge between our houses when a moving truck pulled into Rebecca's driveway. I frowned. She hadn't mentioned expecting a delivery. A man climbed out of the passenger seat, probably around our age. Well-dressed, confident. He smiled the moment he saw Rebecca, then walked over and hugged her. Not a quick handshake. A real hug. Something tightened in my chest before I could stop it. Rebecca looked toward me. Our eyes met. For just a second, her smile faded. She excused herself and started walking in my direction. I should explain. I forced a smile. You don't have to. I want to. She stopped only a few feet away. That's my brother. I looked past her. The one helping unload furniture? She nodded. Daniel. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Rebecca noticed. A tiny smile appeared. Were you jealous? No. She raised an eyebrow. Dean. I was curious. She laughed. No. You were jealous. I wasn't. You absolutely were. I pointed toward the truck. I was evaluating the situation. Oh, really? Professionally. She folded her arms. And what profession would that be? I smiled. Neighbor. Rebecca shook her head, still laughing. I've known you less than 2 weeks, and somehow you're already terrible at hiding what you're feeling. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't sure that was a bad thing. That evening, Daniel invited both of us over for dinner. I've heard enough stories about you, he said as he shook my hand. I figured it was time we finally met. I looked at Rebecca. You've been talking about me? She suddenly became very interested in setting the table. Maybe. Daniel laughed. Maybe. You've been hearing about Dean since the day she met him again. Rebecca shot him a look. Daniel. What? You told me not to embarrass you. I told you not to tell my childhood stories. Oh. He grinned. That's next. Rebecca covered her face. I'm going to regret inviting both of you. Dinner turned out to be one of the easiest evenings I'd had in years. Daniel had an effortless way of making everyone feel comfortable. By dessert, we were laughing like we'd known each other forever. Then Daniel looked at me. So, Rebecca immediately interrupted. No, he smiled. You already know what I'm going to ask. Exactly. He ignored her. Dean, when was the last time you saw my sister laugh this much? Rebecca froze. So we're doing this. Daniel shrugged. I'm asking. I looked at Rebecca. She was smiling. Really smiling. The the kind of smile that reached her eyes. I don't know, but I'm glad I got to see it. For a second, nobody spoke. Daniel quietly nodded. Me too. A few days later, Saturday morning arrived with heavy rain. I was reading in the living room when someone knocked on my door. Rebecca stood outside holding an umbrella. You busy? I was pretending to organize boxes. So, not really. She smiled. I need help. With what? My basement. I looked outside. During a storm? That's exactly why. She sighed. I think I have a leak. An hour later, we were moving plastic storage bins away from one corner of the basement. The leak wasn't serious. Just enough water to make a mess. Rebecca opened one of the boxes to check if anything had gotten wet. Inside were old photo albums. She smiled with relief. They're okay. I helped her move another box. Something slipped out. An old envelope. Neither of us reached for it immediately. Then Rebecca quietly picked it up. She looked at the handwriting. Her smile slowly disappeared. What is it? She turned the envelope over. It's addressed to me. I frowned. You never opened it? She shook her head. I've never seen it before. The envelope had fallen between two albums years ago. It had probably been sitting there untouched ever since she moved into the house. She carefully opened it. Inside was a folded letter. As she read the first few lines, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't ask questions. I simply waited. After a long silence, she looked at me. It was from my grandmother. I stayed quiet. She wrote it just before she passed away. Rebecca smiled sadly. It never reached me. She folded the letter against her chest. You know what the last sentence says? I shook my head. She looked at me with tears still in her eyes and whispered, Life has a funny way of bringing the right people back when you need them most. Neither of us spoke. Because somehow, felt less like advice written years ago, and more like the story we were living now. Rebecca carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. I wish she could have met you. The words caught me completely off guard. Me? She nodded. She knew about you. I frowned. You told your grandmother about a customer from a coffee shop? Rebecca laughed softly. When you say it like that, it sounds a little ridiculous. A little? She smiled. A lot. We both laughed. Then she looked at the envelope again. I used to tell her about this guy who came in every Thursday. The one who always ordered the same coffee. The one who tipped more than he could afford. The one who smiled even when life was obviously falling apart. I looked down. I didn't smile that much. You tried. She looked at me. And sometimes trying is enough. The rain finally stopped an hour later. We carried the last storage box upstairs. Rebecca locked the basement door behind us. I owe you dinner. You've already paid me. With what? Cookies. She laughed. I can't solve every problem with cookies. I'm not convinced. Oh, I think you're undefeated so far. She shook her head, smiling. Come over at 6. I'll bring dessert. Deal. Dinner stretched long into the evening. We talked about everything we had missed over the past 15 years. Favorite books, old jobs, embarrassing college stories, the places we'd wanted to visit but never had. At one point, Rebecca disappeared into the kitchen. When she came back, she was holding 2 small bowls of vanilla ice cream. She looked almost embarrassed. I remembered something. What? The first dessert you ever ordered at Maggie's. I looked at the bowl. Vanilla ice cream. You always said fancy desserts were overrated. I laughed. I can't believe you remember that. I told you. I remember almost everything. As we finished eating, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. The smile disappeared. You don't have to answer, I said. She hesitated. I probably should. She stepped into the hallway. I didn't try to listen, but her voice carried just enough for me to notice the change in her tone. No, I understand. I'll think about it. When she came back, she forced a smile. Everything okay? She nodded too quickly. Just work. I knew that wasn't the whole truth, but we'd only recently found each other again. If she wanted to tell me, she would. The next morning, I was watering the flowers I'd planted near the porch when Daniel pulled into my driveway. He climbed out of his truck with 2 cups of coffee. I figured we should talk. That sentence immediately caught my attention. Sounds serious. Not bad serious. He handed me one of the cups. We sat on the porch in silence for a moment. Finally he sighed. Rebecca won't tell you. Tell me what? He looked across the street toward her house. She was offered a teaching position. I smiled. That's great. It is. It's also in Oregon. My smile faded. Oregon. He nodded. Almost 3,000 miles from here. I stared across the street. Does she want it? Daniel took a slow sip of coffee. I honestly don't know anymore. What do you mean? A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. He looked at me. Now, I'm not so sure. For the first time since Rebecca knocked on my door with a plate of cookies, I felt something I hadn't expected. The quiet fear that life might be getting ready to separate us all over again. I spent the rest of the day pretending Daniel's words hadn't affected me. They had. Every time I looked out the window, I found myself glancing toward Rebecca's house. Her car was in the driveway. The porch light came on just after sunset. Everything looked normal, but it no longer felt normal, because now I knew something she hadn't told me. Sunday afternoon, I saw her planting flowers near the mailbox. I walked over. She looked up and smiled. Perfect timing. For what? She handed me a small shovel. I bought too many lavender plants. I think that's becoming a pattern. What is? You accidentally buying too much food. Too many flowers. Too many reasons to invite me over. She laughed. I hadn't noticed. I have. We worked quietly for a few minutes. The smell of fresh soil filled the air. Birds chirped somewhere overhead. It was one of those peaceful afternoons that made the whole neighborhood feel slower. Rebecca finally broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Always. If someone offered you your dream job, but it meant leaving everything behind, what would you do? There it was. She hadn't mentioned Oregon. But she didn't have to. I carefully pressed another flower into the ground. I guess it depends. On what? Whether I'd be leaving something. Or someone. She looked down at the flower bed. Neither of us spoke. A few minutes later, we sat on her porch with 2 glasses of iced tea. Rebecca looked unusually thoughtful. I didn't tell you something. I know. She turned toward me. You do. I nodded. Daniel stopped by yesterday. She sighed. I should have guessed. He was worried. So am I. For the first time since we'd met again, I saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. They want me to start in 6 weeks. Oregon. She nodded. It's a wonderful school. I've already visited. They're offering more money. Smaller classes. Better resources. It sounds perfect. It does. So why don't you look happy? She smiled sadly. Because 15 years ago, I let life make a decision for me. She looked straight into my eyes. I promised myself I'd never do that again. I leaned back in the porch chair. So what's stopping you? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked across the small lawn separating our houses. Then quietly said, I finally found something I wasn't looking for. I knew exactly what she meant. Neither of us needed to say it aloud. I don't want to make another mistake. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dean, I've spent 15 years wondering what would have happened if I talked to you that last Thursday. She smiled through tired eyes. I don't want to spend another 15 years wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. Every sensible part of me wanted to tell her to accept the job. It was a wonderful opportunity. But another part of me, the honest part, didn't want her to leave. I looked at her. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I know. But I am going to tell you one thing. She waited. If you make this decision, make it because it's what you truly want. Not because you're afraid. She stared at me for several long seconds, then smiled. You've changed. I hope so. She gently reached across the small table. For the first time, she took my hand. Not by accident. Not while passing cookies. Not while moving boxes. On purpose. I was hoping you'd say that. At that moment, I realized something. 15 years ago, we had missed our chance because neither of us had found the courage to say what we felt. This time, neither of us was hiding anymore. Rebecca didn't let go of my hand right away. Neither did I. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, children were laughing. A lawn mower hummed in the distance. Life carried on as if nothing important had happened. But for me, everything had changed. So, Rebecca smiled. What now? I laughed. I was hoping you had the answer. I've spent 15 years overthinking everything. I'm trying something different. What? Being honest. I nodded. I like that plan. She looked down at our hands. So do I. The following Friday, I came home later than usual. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a moving truck parked in front of Rebecca's house. My stomach dropped. For one terrifying second, I thought she'd made her decision. I parked so quickly I barely remembered turning off the engine. Rebecca was standing in the driveway. She looked at my face, then immediately started laughing. What? I asked. You thought I was leaving. I looked toward the truck. She couldn't stop smiling. Dean, it's my new couch. I let out the longest breath of my life. She folded her arms. You really thought I disappeared without saying goodbye? I looked at her. I've seen that story before. Her smile faded. She walked closer. I'm not that girl anymore. I know. No. She gently squeezed my hand. I need you to really know. If I ever leave, you'll hear it from me. Not from a moving truck. I smiled. I'd appreciate that. A week later, Rebecca invited me over again. This time there were no cookies, no pie, no excuse, just dinner. Halfway through the meal, she disappeared into the hallway. When she returned, she was holding a white envelope. She placed it on the table. I looked at it. The job. She nodded. I have to give them an answer tonight. I didn't touch the envelope. Neither did she. Finally, I asked, what does your heart say? Rebecca looked at me, then smiled. It says something my grandmother used to tell me. What? She took a slow breath. Some opportunities change your career. She paused. Others change your life. And, she looked directly into my eyes. I already know which one matters more. Slowly, she opened the envelope, pulled out the contract, folded it once, then twice, and quietly slid it back inside. I'm staying. I stared at her. You don't regret it? She shook her head without the slightest hesitation. Not for 1 second. Autumn slowly turned into winter. Life settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Morning coffee on the porch. Weekend walks through the neighborhood. Sunday dinners that somehow lasted 4 hours. The empty house I'd moved into no longer felt empty. Not because someone lived there with me, because someone had become part of my everyday life. One evening, just before Christmas, Rebecca knocked on my door. She wasn't carrying cookies. She was holding a small gift bag. I found something. What is it? Open it. Inside was an old ceramic coffee mug, white, with faded blue letters. Across the front were the words, Maggie's Coffee House. I looked at her in disbelief. I thought they threw everything away. Rebecca smiled. I rescued 2 mugs before they closed. You kept one. For 15 years? She nodded. I guess I was waiting for the right person to drink from it. I looked from the mug to her. Then I smiled. A real smile. The same one she'd been reminding me not to lose all those years ago. Rebecca smiled back. There it is. What? The smile. I laughed. You know. What? You were right. About what? I gently took her hand. I never forgot. She squeezed my hand softly. No. You just needed someone to remind you. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season drifted quietly past the window. Inside, for the first time in 15 years, finally felt like home.